Alright everyone, if you've ever listened to any of the Obama prank calls, you've probably heard the line, "Your mother was begging Barack to stop." And I'm thinking that's what every reasonably strategically minded Democrat right now is thinking, reading link in the description, archived of course, and looking at the fact that there are actually Democrats out there that are planning to make critical race theory an offensive election issue in the midterms. They are preparing to defend critical race theory. They're going to make it a campaign issue. I love it. I think that's a good idea. I wish them well. I hope that you ram this down the party's throat, and I hope that critical race theory is your main plank going forward. We need to teach racial justice. Critical race theory is part of that. I really hope that you're as crazy as you sound. I hope you're as crazy as this article suggests. Not only will you lose in the midterms, you might stop existing as a party. Critical race theory, to be clear, has already been rejected by the vast majority of the U.S. public. Something like 75% of U.S. adults polled oppose teaching it in taxpayer-funded schools. It is at least a slim majority, and in most cases a supermajority of men and women, parents and non-parents, gays and straights, people of every ethnic bloc, people of every former national origin, immigrant and non-immigrant, every race. Do you see a pattern here? In most of these cases, it's a supermajority of that block of the public. Every age demographic. You poll the Gen Zers. They're not in favor of critical race theory either. So who exactly, what votes exactly are you gaining by defending the point? Now, I think the more strategically minded Democrats, because, I mean, it's clear they want to subvert the educational system and dumb it down. That's the goal. It's not about teaching racial justice or anything like that. But the more sane Democrats have backed up. They've backed away from the label critical race theory, and their new strategy is to teach critical race theory, but just remove the term critical race theory. I'm going to keep going back to my analogy because I think that it fucking rules, which is that you can call it a potato, or a pomme de terre, or an art apple, or whatever Germans call potatoes. It probably sounds like you're about to commit a violent act when you say it. It doesn't matter, though. If you start describing the object that you're talking about, that you've given these different names. Of course, that's according to different languages. There are different terms for different ideas in the same language. Is it an automobile or a car? Now start describing it. Chances are the automobile conforms basically to the same premise. It might be slightly modified. Maybe it's a sedan and really you meant a two-door car. Same function, same basic principle, same rules apply to driving it. It's got four wheels. It's got an engine. It's probably using gasoline, etc., etc., etc. Once you begin describing the two things, you see that they are fundamentally the same. Intelligent Democrats who want to subvert the educational system in favor of Marxism, which is quite literally one of the backings of critical race theory. I pointed this out every time I talk about it because they're not usually forthcoming, and some of them just are ignorant of this fact, so don't assume that they're trying to be subversive. Always assume ignorance instead and just point out, look, it's in critical race theory's own writings. There's several authors that have written works, and they're part of critical race theory, not from the critical perspective. They openly acknowledge that Marxism plays a role. In fact, if you look at the basic boiled-down premise of Marxism, you rip class struggle out and put race struggle in, you get the same exact idea. Again, potato, pomme de terre. The only difference is that you're dealing with a red spring potato instead of a russet. That's the only difference when we look at the basic premise of Marxism and the basic premise of critical race theory. They are fundamentally the same thing. You say, oh, yeah, you got stung by a bee. Well, what kind of bee was it? You got stung by a bee. Who cares? Honeybee, bumblebee. They all feel about the same until you move into yellow jacket territory and they're not technically a bee. That would be slightly different. That would be like the difference between critical race theory and Malcolm X or something. You know, there's some sanity because there's actually an attempt to teach some history. Critical race theory, there's not. This is like going into battle with a slingshot. You've got to be goddamn crazy. I hope they do it. I hope that they force some of the mainline Democrats, because this is coming out of leftoid field, of course. They don't understand strategy like the Nancy Pelosi and the Barack Obama types generally do. I'd say Biden, but his mind has devolved into vegetable at this point, so I don't think that he's really strategically planning anything other than trying to hold in his charts. Usually he forgets. They have to rush him off very quickly after he speaks, you may have noticed. Do you think that when he pounds the podium and raises his voice, sometimes the pressure gets a little bit too much and maybe he has a little bit of an oopsie poopsie caca? I think that that's not exactly that unlikely. You know that he by now wears adult undergarments, so there's no other option for him. If you make critical race theory of a platform issue, force the Democrats to acknowledge it nationally, you're going to get curb stomped. Why do you think that if you look at the battleground state polling, Biden is like 5 points behind, running 10 points behind even the aggregate? By the way, if you look at Biden's support state by state, where the polls break it down at all, his remaining support, which is already down near 40% now, disapproval soaring up towards 54 at the moment, the gap is now well into the double-digit range. A lot of the remnant support is just from blue states. In battleground states, especially those that are somewhat more rural, it's collapsed further. It's 15, 20 points. The Democrats are really hurting right now, and you want to take one of the main primary reasons why you lost several important races in the last slew of elections. One of the most non-divisive issues, because you've got a supermajority of Americans opposing you on it, and you want to put it to the forefront? This would be like if you decided, hey, yeah, the official DNC slogan for the midterms will be, don't worry, inflation's not too bad. This would be probably roughly akin to that. Virtually, there are a lot of parents in the United States. I love it when they cast it off as, well, white people are just resistant to a critical view of their own history as basically violent and evil people. Is that why a plurality of parents of every single race oppose teaching it? Is that why when you look out into these crowds that are showing up to these school board meetings to protest, if you look at an area that's like in the middle of nowhere, no wonder it's going to be 95% white. And those are always, by the way, the pictures that they use when they make stories about it for the legacy media. If Hassan Piker is talking about it, you can bet that it's West Virginia or Alabama or rural Alabama or something. In reality land, if you look in blue states in more urban or suburban areas that are more diverse or tolerant and vibrant communities, you see a pretty representative example of those people showing up to protest. They're black parents and white parents, Hispanic and non-Hispanic. Some of them are Asian. There are gay couples that'll go there and protest critical race theory because it's horse shit. It's revisionist nonsense. If you want to help for the first time in, well, certainly since I've been politically aware, the Republicans are the ones that are promulgating a better educational system and the Democrats are the ones trying to destroy it. Now, I realize that they've always been pushing the progressivism thing, the bullshit into the curriculum, but they were the ones generally seen higher on education. It's like they wanted to fund it more and shit like that, which only goes so far. Meanwhile, both parties have dumbed down testing standards. For every No Child Left Behind, a la George W., who's barely literate by some people's accounts, to you had a common crap, a common core, a la Obama. They're both doing the same thing, don't let them fool you. Globalists are globalists, authoritarians are shitty and authoritarian. But now you've got an open attack on education, specifically on history. And you want to fund it at the taxpayer level. In a period, by the way, in which the educational system is already suffering because something like 10% of parents have moved to private schools or homeschooling, specifically because of crap like this. And you want to make it a bigger issue. If you want to to get rid of AP courses, dumb down testing standards, and push revisionism, Marxism into the curriculum, the only people that are going to be affected by that at some point are the poor kids. Because their parents don't have enough money to put them into a private school. And they don't have enough money to hire tutors. They don't have enough money for one parent to stay home to homeschool them so that they can get an actual education. You're hurting the working and poor class kids, not hurting the upper middle class kids, the ones that you complain so much about being privileged and evil already. They were born with the original sin of not having a dirt-floored fucking cottage to live in, especially depending on their race, of course. It's very lopsided. Critical race theory as an election issue, my goodness. do we need any more evidence at this point that the leftoids don't understand basic politics, basic civics, basic governance, the very concept of, hey, you actually have to get elected before you can do anything? Maybe you should fucking tone it down. Maybe the point of elected officials is predominantly to reinforce and represent the will of the public. Unless it's like a 50-50 issue, you know, and there are times they have to stand against the direct democracy thing, but the Democrats tend to be the ones that parrot that so much. Well then, if the vast majority of virtually every community of Americans is completely against teaching critical race theory, why don't you just drop the issue? But they can't. They're just nuts, incapable of learning and self-reflection. That's about all. Peace out.